I don't know that anyone could say with 100% certainty of it, what Luke records for us in Acts 2. My general conclusion has been, and I'm not dogmatic about it, but my general conclusion has been, here's the miraculous part. They speak, and everyone there hears what they're saying in their native language. Otherwise, you have an oddity, right? Because who takes the forefront? Peter, right? Peter takes, and so by implication, if we're saying that, well, here was an apostle and he's over on this stump or spot and he's speaking this language, and then here's another one over here and he's speaking that language, and here's another one over here and he's speaking, then that kind of takes away that moment where Peter seems to have a captive audience and they're all listening to him in their language as he's speaking. So that's been my, that's been my conclusion. The power that was given to them is very unique in that sense. That as they speak, it becomes speech that is understandable by anybody that's hearing it. And yet, I also appreciate the fact when you see conversations about speaking in tongues later in the New Testament, when different individuals receive that ability, it seems to have limitations that does not seem to be placed upon the apostles in Acts chapter 2. That's the best answer I can give you, because I don't know that the text, you know what I mean? There's nothing that jumps out at me and goes, it's exactly this. But there sure seems to be the idea or the ability that they can speak. So it went back on? Okay. All right. It's amazing. So for those who are at home, if you weren't with me for a little while, I'm not going to catch you up, but apparently you're back. So let's move on to this last section then. He says, as he leads them out, again, Luke's giving us a very short version of all the events that are going on. So he leads them out as far as where? Bethany. Why is that significant? Okay, so we've got Mary and Martha and Lazarus, and we've got that record of the events that happened on one of his travels through that area. But this was the kind of the residence for that last week, right? He and his apostles were staying in Bethany, and then they would go into Jerusalem. And his initial, even Luke records, his initial travel into Jerusalem that week was met with what? Joy and celebration, right? The people were excited. They may have had some misconceptions about what kind of king he was going to be, but they were excited about the fact he was there. That influence begins to pressure the chief priests and rulers to decide, we got to do something with him. He's gaining too much popularity. But his initial travels into Jerusalem was met with tremendous joy on behalf of those who witnessed him. And so then he'd go back to Bethany at night, and then he'd come back in town. And he'd go back. And then finally he tells his disciples they need to go in and find what? Just trying to give you a reminder of the history. He sent a couple of them. Okay, that's right. So he sent a couple of them ahead and said, listen, you go and you're going to find a man, and he's going to have somebody's going to have water, right, pitch water, and he's going to guide you to a guy that's got an upper room, and you can make ready to partake of the Passover, right? From there, then he ends up where? In the garden, right? He ends up in the garden. That's where that prayer, if this cup can pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. That's when that occurs. Then who's betraying? Judas comes and betrays him, right? And then he's led off to So Bethany was significant. That's the point I'm trying to remind you of. Bethany was significant in many ways as it relates to Jesus and his work and the things that he was doing, in particular that last week of his life. And so it's, I don't think, coincidental that they go back out to Bethany and he lifts up his hands and blesses them there. And it came to pass while he blessed them, he was parted from them and carried up into heaven. So Luke records for us, again, very abbreviated, but that here's this moment where Jesus has kind of a last conversation. There have been About how many days, by the way, from the resurrection till now? About 40 days, right? So for 40 days, Jesus has been, people have been seeing him, talking to him, having conversations with him. He's been sitting at people's tables and having meals with them. There were occasions where groups as large as 500 people in one moment that were seeing Jesus after his resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 illustrates that to us. And so now you've reached this point where all of that has happened. He's gathered with his apostles before his ascension one last time here in Bethany. And while he's offering a blessing upon them, Luke records that he is carried up into heaven. And they worshiped him and did what? Returned to, yeah, I'm not trying to trick you here. They returned to Jerusalem because that's what they were told to do, right? That's what they were told to go wait in Jerusalem. So they returned to Jerusalem. But here's the interesting part. He describes them as heading to Jerusalem with what? With joy. That's one of the first moments I think we find where his disciples finally what? Yeah, they finally get it. Right? All the other times he'd talk about going back to his Father and they'd say what? You going to leave us? Then what? What are you going to do? If you leave us, what are we going to do? Right? And that's when he makes that statement in John 14, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. And that whole conversation occurs there in that text. That every time he mentions his death or the fact that he's not staying with them permanently, it brought anxiety and challenges and stress to them. They worried and were challenged by that. But now the light bulbs are going off, right? All of it is starting to come to them with some levels of clarity. And now they see him ascend to his Father like he has said all along he was going to do. But now their reaction is with joy. After they've worshiped him, they're beginning to have some clarity about what's going on. And they head back into Jerusalem with great joy. And they stayed there continually in the temple, praising and blessing God for the next 10 days when we can arrive to Pentecost. And the Spirit comes and we begin the process of teaching the gospel. You see that fulfillment of all these things. And they have a lot of, for lack of a better description, those light bulb moments, right? That where they're hearing, but they're not quite understanding, and they're trying to grasp why he's teaching things or doing things the way he is, and then something finally clicks, and they get it. And there seems to be a tremendous amount of that in this moment, even as they see him ascend back to the Father. Go ahead, Bob.
They're advocating the Holy Spirit. Teach them, tell them, or speak for them. Was this revealed to them prior to Jesus' death, or was it afterwards?
Well, I think he had some comments before his death about how he was going to continue to build them up and lead them and guide them in the manners in which he would do that. I'd have to go back and look at some of those texts, but
That would have something to do with their peace of mind.
yeah, and I think so. I agree. I think that though I don't know that he gives them clarity as to how that's going to happen, but they certainly have some comfort in knowing that they're not alone, right? And that's finally getting through their head. He may be no longer bodily present with them, but they're not going to be alone. And he's sending a promise of the Father back to them that will give them the power and ability to accomplish the work that he intends for them. Any other thoughts or comments about the latter part of the book of Luke? I appreciate it. Had thoughts I would finish that sooner, but anyway, I had a little bit left over to complete tonight. Anything about the book at all? Something that you thought of along the way that we didn't necessarily talk about? Go ahead, Dan.
We talked about those that didn't recognize him, or not letting go about the way Magdalene. Maybe we discussed this already, not here, but she was in that too. And running and seeing Jesus and didn't know who it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that we talked a little bit about the fact that some of that is on purpose, and some of that just by their disbelief that it could be him, and the change his body would have went through the brutality and everything leading up to and the cross and the crucifixion itself. Okay, so let me switch gears, obviously, with you and start a conversation in our last 15 or 20 minutes here with concerning the book of Isaiah. And I wanted to come to this for a couple of different reasons. One was some time ago I was asked if I'd spend some time in the book of Isaiah and just hadn't got to it yet. And also I felt like it was important because he's kind of thought of as the what as it relates to Jesus. Right, he's the Messianic prophet. They often refer to him. It's not all he does, by the way. There's a lot of comparisons, and there's some other materials you can go to and look at that. And Larry and I even had a brief conversation before services tonight about how you can kind of almost see the breakdown of the book of Isaiah almost like you do the Bible. You can see these chapters dedicated to that Old Testament history aspect, and then context or portions of it that lead to you, talk to you about the prophecies relating to the coming of Jesus. You kind of see that breakdown between the two. And so I thought it would be important for us, maybe, though it seems like it's in reverse, but Jesus said he was the fulfillment of all these things. Well, let's go back and look at that and see these prophecies that were made concerning him. And I put out, if you didn't grab it tonight, it's okay. They're back there on the table when you go out. You won't necessarily need it tonight. But I did put some material back there. I'm going to use some borrowed material just to give us a roadmap that Mark Copeland had put together. And so it's back there on the table. It's on the website as well. So anybody at home, if you want to get a copy, you can go to our website. There's already a link there to be able to download this material and take a look at it. And again, it's a survey, and that's kind of probably the way I'm going to approach it. I won't necessarily get every ounce of every thought out of everything. It's a survey approach. And so just keep that in mind as we go through it, that at times we're going to look at chunks of it rather than 2 or 3 words as we work through it. So keep that in mind. Let me share with you what I'd hoped, and although he said that came back, I might be able to do it here now. Let me just take a quick look and see if I can share it from here. No, okay. But I think I can do it up here. So, in the beginning of the book, he talks a little bit about who Isaiah is, and it gives us a little bit of a framework in relationship to when he prophesies. I'm going to try to blow that up a little bit for you so you can see that. And if you recall, I've shared this same timeline with you before, and so this isn't something new. I've printed out copies of this. If you think about it, you may have a copy of it sitting at home from before. But go with me into the very beginning of the book of Isaiah, and let's just get a quick kind of summary thought of who we're dealing with. So Isaiah is considered what kind of prophet if you were looking at it on a Bible chart? He's messianic, but I mean, yeah, he's major, right? We talk about major and minor prophets, and that's because how important they are, right? No, thank you for correcting me. No, it has to do with how much they wrote. And so the major prophets are those who write a lot, and the minor prophets are those who have less recorded as it relates to what they wrote. That's the only difference. So major and minor are not relevant to the idea of one is more important than the other. Major and minor is relevant to how much they wrote. And Isaiah happens to be actually in the canon, the first, right, of the major prophets that are listed for us, although he comes at a later date in relationship to when he comes on the scene. I'll blow this timeline out for you, and again, I don't expect you to be able to see it, but from the time of the divided kingdom, there are several hundred years before. Oh, it's not on. So you're going to have to think. Just use your brain. think about it being on. There you go. She's been correcting me all week anyway, so here's this chart, and Isaiah actually spreads out over how many kings from Judah? We'll go into verse 1 of chapter 1. 4 of them, right? The vision of Isaiah the son of Amoz, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. So that's a long time, okay? That's a pretty good swath of time that Isaiah is prophesying as it relates to these kings of Judah. His message goes to the kings of Judah and the people of Judah, and ultimately he'll be kind of the one that deals with Hezekiah towards the end of this process. So of those four, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, how many of them were good? All right, you're going to say one, which would normally be a pretty good guess. I got two. All right, so I got a 1 over in this corner, I got a 2 back there. Anyone want to take 3? I would. Okay, I'm going to take 3. Everybody else has got 4. Let's look. Let me show you. So let's go to 2 Kings, okay? Let's go and look at what the text tell us about each of these kings. So 2 Kings chapter 15, verse 1. In the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, began Azariah, son of Amaziah, king of Judah, to reign. Now, don't get confused by how his name is listed there in the King's. That's Uzziah. 16 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was that. And he did that which was, what's the text say in verse 3? He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. Okay, so Uzziah, there's one. Okay, there's one that did right in the sight of the Lord. Skip down to verse 32. Same chapter, 2 Kings 15. Sorry for your eyes. 2 Kings 15. I'm not showing you up. Am I? No, I'm not even showing you that up there. I can't show you that up there. So in the 2nd year, Pekah the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, began Jotham the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, to reign. 5 and 20 years, so that's 5 and 20, 25, 52, 77 years. Okay, that's a long span between those two kings. In Jerusalem, his mother's name was Jerusha, the daughter of Zadok, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, in verse 34. He did according to all that his father Uzziah had done. So, 2 of them out of the 4 are spoken of as have done good. Go to chapter 16 now. Chapter 16 and verse 1. In the 17th year, Pekah the son of Remaliah, Ahaz the son of Jotham, Ahaz the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. So Uzziah, Jotham, now we're to Ahaz, the third of the 4 that Isaiah was present for. And he began to reign. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father. Now keep in mind, they always refer back to King David as all their fathers. Okay, they're not necessarily in the lineage that way, but they would always refer back to King David as the one that was kind of the example that they were all kind of pointing to. But so first 2 did what was right in the sight of the Lord. Ahaz comes along and he decides, I want to behave like the Israel kings, who were never good, right? None of the kings of Israel were ever good. And so if I ever asked you a question, how many of the kings of Israel were good, or were they good? You just say no to that. Always say no to that, because none of them were in Israel. But 2 out of the 3 so far described here in the days of Isaiah are listed as good. Ahaz changes that, and he doesn't do what's right in the eyes of the Lord. Now jump to chapter 18. Verse 1. 2 Kings 18, verse 1. So now it came to pass in the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, that Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. 25 years old was he when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years, 1645, 77. That's well over 100 and so years between these 4 kings. And Isaiah is kind of sandwiched in the middle of all of them, where he kind of hits the very end of Uzziah and carries in through Hezekiah. We'll see it here in a minute. But he did that, verse 3, and he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord, according to all that David his father did. So 3 out of the 4 that Isaiah spans are described as kings who did that which was right in the eyes of the Lord. And yet, Isaiah's prophecy against Judah is what? You're coming to an end. He's in an odd time to be saying that, and it'll be a while. Let me go back up here, because I have to show this to you on this computer. So, look if you can see it. I'll try to show it to you here as best I can, as big as I can. So, there's those kings, right? We kept referencing Pekah, the king of Israel, and he was in charge of Israel at the time some of this was going on. You've got these other prophets working at the same time. Hosea is talking to Israel. Micah is talking to Judah. Isaiah is speaking to Judah. But in the midst of all that, what happens to Israel? Captivity, right? But Judah lasts what? Yeah, so there, many years later, before they're going to go through several kings. I'll widen this out for you a little bit and bring it up onto the bottom of your screen. They're going to go through Manasseh, Josiah, Jehoiakim, Zedekiah. Then the destruction of Jerusalem comes. But Isaiah is already going to be talking about these kinds of things. And then he's going to talk about the promise that's way out into the future of Jesus, the Messiah that's coming. And so it's an interesting conversation as Isaiah is going to have with Judah, and in particular Hezekiah. And you go into the Chronicles, and he outlines it pretty clearly, these conversations that Isaiah comes and has with Hezekiah as it relates to the challenges and difficulties that the people, or that Hezekiah was experiencing based on the choices and decisions that they were making. It's interesting because right from Hezekiah then, we end up with who? Manasseh, and he's just flat out evil. Okay? Manasseh's just evil. And you go and read about the Chronicles in relationship to Manasseh. He's just evil. And so you've got good king, good king, good king. Ahaz goes, I like Israel's kings better. I think I'll act like them. So you got that 16-year period where he kind of goes in the wrong direction. Hezekiah comes on the scene. He recognizes the mistakes of that, tries to get the people back on the right track, does so in so many ways. But Hezekiah stumbles. Go to 2 Chronicles chapter 32. 2 Chronicles chapter 32. Now I want you to notice verse 24. 2 Chronicles 32, verse 24. So in those days Hezekiah was sick to the death, and prayed unto the Lord, and he spake unto him, and he gave him a sign. But Hezekiah rendered not again according to the benefit done unto him. For his heart was lifted up, and therefore there was wrath upon him and upon Judah and Jerusalem. Notwithstanding, Hezekiah humbled himself for the pride of his heart, both he and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, so that the wrath of the Lord came not upon them in the days of Hezekiah. And so, Hezekiah is a good king, but he's not a perfect king. And some pride kicked into Hezekiah's life that created some problems that Isaiah, 2 Kings would illustrate for us, the record of Isaiah will illustrate for us, where he's got to come and have some pretty sobering conversations with Hezekiah. And he basically initially tells Hezekiah, listen, you're what? Yeah, get your house in order, because your life's coming to an end. Hezekiah goes over against the wall and just prays and prays and prays to the Lord, and the text basically says God hears him and says, okay, I'll give you 15 more years, and you'll continue to live, but the consequence that coming is coming. And the challenges that came upon them because of the decision-making and the pride that they have. Anybody recall what that pride was, by the way? What was he proud about? What
What did he do? You may remember that piece of history. Let me ask a secondary question, maybe it'll help.
break your memory. So there are basically two real enemies that they're having to deal with. Assyria and who? Well, Israel in some ways, but a foreign kingdom. Babylon, right? So you got Assyria and Babylon. So these princes from Babylon come down to Jerusalem. And Hezekiah goes, hey guys, come on in and see all my wealth. Right? It's like, going and buying a Maserati and sit in your garage with the keys in it and then tell everybody, hey, the garage is unlocked. Come on in, right? That's kind of what he did. And it wasn't just that he was trying to show them how God had blessed him. He's puffed up about it. That's where the pride is. And he's so proud about all this wealth that he had gained and all these great blessings. And God had to humble him and to kind of get him back on track. And so that's what causes this ultimate scene. Manasseh comes along, and secular history indicates that he most likely had Isaiah killed. In fact, some allude, let me share one more text with you outside of Isaiah, and then hopefully you can remember all this when we come back next Wednesday to set this backdrop for you before we start talking about the narrative itself. Go into that book of faith there in Hebrews chapter 11. Now I want you to notice, so when he talks about the acts of faith of various individuals, and he talks about how some received resurrection in verse 35, while others faced challenge and difficulty. Notice verse 36, others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, and tormented. Many secondary writers, as it relates to biblical narrative, claim that Isaiah was one of them they're talking about when he says here, some of them were sawn asunder. And there are many who conclude that Manasseh had Isaiah destroyed or killed in that fashion. Now again, that's secondary. We don't have that biblical record of what actually ultimately happens to Isaiah. That's what secular history seems to unfold as it relates to him. But he does leave the scene. And as the text said, his prophecy work happens within those four kings. Then the evil Manasseh hits the stage, and then you don't really hear from that point further. We don't know anything about Amoz either, by the way, his dad. We do know that he had two sons. They're mentioned in one is mentioned in chapter 7, the other is mentioned in chapter 8. But we don't know much about his father that was labeled there at the beginning of chapter 1. And a lot of that introductory things you can read. If you pick up one of the booklets back there, you'll be able to see some of that extra history and so forth in that. And so next Wednesday night, we'll start actually talking about the book and introducing the book itself, and using this outline that we stuck back there, and you can grab on your way out this evening. I know. No, I'm talking Isaiah. Manasseh had Isaiah. All that I was talking about, the torn or sawn asunder, I'm talking about what happened to Isaiah, according to your secular history, at the hands of Manasseh. Yeah.